Now let's start with variables. So what exactly is a variable? So variable, you can say any particular name which refers to a particular memory location, or any ID or any entity which actually points to a particular memory location is called a variable. So let's say you have created x equal to 10. That x equal to 10, for you it is just a name, whereas internally what happens is this 10 will be stored in a memory location, and that memory location is pointed by this x, and that x is your variable. And in Java, variable declaration is mandatory because it's a compile time language and you have to declare everything you are using. So only then it knows how you are supposed to use that variable and how the conversion has to happen, all that it will understand. And these variables can be changed during program execution also if required. Now this is how you can see the syntax of a variable is. You will have a data type first, then you will have variable. If you want, you can initialize the value there itself. It is all optional. Similarly, you can have multiple variables like this. So let's see this. Here, if you see, this is the data type and you have v1, v2, v3, three variables you have declared. So here we are saying declared. That means we are telling Java that v1, v2, v3 for this program, they will be of the data type integer. That is what we are trying to say. That's why we said declaring. Then once we declare, the other way you can also do it is, apart from this, if let's say you want to initialize v1 with something, v2 with something, v3 with something, either you can do separately or as part of the declaration you can do like this, where you are saying int v1 equal to 10, comma v2 equal to 10. So you are initializing v1 and v2 at the time of declaration itself. That is also acceptable in Java. Now, when you look at variable, there are different types of variables comes in, and basically there are three types of variables you can identify. One is local variable, instance variable, and static variable. So what exactly is local variable, instance, and static variable? Let's see one by one. So what is exactly a local variable? So local variable is nothing but a variable which is specific to a method. That means beyond that method, nobody knows about that variable at all. Okay, so that means, like, for example, let's say you have written a function saying greet hello. In that you have used a variable called x, and that variable is only known to that function greet hello. Beyond that, even if somebody wants access, it might not be available. So that is called local variable because it is local or bounded to that function only. So the advantage with the local variable is the same variable you can use in other function. That is the biggest advantage. With that, you can easily maintain or avoid the namespace collisions, which generally happens when you use the same name across multiple functions. Here in this case, fortunately, we have the local variable, and that helps in getting all this. And one rule to remember is local variable cannot be defined as static. And another thing is, all this local variable initialization is just mandatory because certain variables in Java are by default initialized. Even we don't initialize it, we will talk about that. Now coming to instance variable. Instance variables are something when you create an object, whatever the object variables as part of the, we are talking about object as data, right? In that there will be some data and all. That data part is called the instance variables. So that instance variables by default gets initialized to 0 if they are integers. If they are strings, they will be initialized to empty string. If they are float, they will be initialized to 0.0. So based on the data type, it will take the closest initial value and do it. By default, we don't need to do it. That's why I said local variables you need to initialize, whereas here instance variables you need not. But it's always a good idea using constructor or some mechanism you initialize the variables. Coming to static variable. Static variables are variables which actually you put static before it. So these variables are moreover, I would say, a common variables that is required for multiple, instances of the class. Like let's say you have created a student class, and in the student class you have 40 or 50 students. So each student is an object, and there is one variable called the number of students. That number of students is something you need to count whenever a new student joins into that class, isn't it? That number of students, you can make it as a static variable. That means the same variable will be updated by everybody whenever joins it, and the same variable will be visible to all the objects as it is. So that kind of variable which is common across multiple instances of the same class are called static variables. And you can always create that variable by putting a static keyword before it. And the initialization of static variables is also not mandatory. It will be the default initialized to 0. And if you want to access the static variable, you can always give the class name and you can say class name dot that variable, and automatically you can access the static variable. Let's see in this program how do we identify it. Like starting with local variables, if you see here in the method, whatever we have written, this n equal to 90, this is your local variable. This no equal to 90, understand that outside this method, nobody knows about it. This is only bound to this method and this must be initialized. And this cannot be accessed anywhere from outside. That is why it is called local variable. The scope of this variable is limited to this function only and nobody can see from outside. Whereas if you look at here also we have a local variable if you closely observe, because main is also a function just like that. We know that it is a standard function by Java, but if you look at theoretically this is also a function. So this also needs some variable which has to be initialized. And you can see this is also another local variable. Whereas if you see there is another type of variable we have which is static int v equal 100. This is a class or static variable which can be seen by multiple instances of the same class var. That means let's say I have created 5 or 6 objects of this capital VAR, which is var. I can have access to the same v variable across without any changes. That means I just need to say var.v and I can access this 100 automatically. So it acts like a global variable to all the instances of this class var.